So I'm very excited about this last panel here. Um, you really just selfishly, because I'm getting ready to found a school in 14 months, and so I want to hear what you all learned, just so I could take some notes. I will say one thing about it. A friend of mine asked me a new friend about the little bio right up in here. I think I accidentally sent away a bio statement that's about 5 years old. Somebody said you're writing a dissertation and starting a school. I'm like, no, that was years back. So this is, I think from Dan and Russ, they say starting a school is crazy enough. Wouldn't try to do it at that moment. But maybe if we just take just a second. Again, I'm Kevin Clark, and maybe just take and introduce yourselves and say something about the school you started, where it's at, what the name of the school is, and then bring it back to me. I'll ask you a couple questions. Maybe we'll just start with some introductions.
My name is Danielle. My husband, Stephen, is over there. We are planting a school in Cleveland, Ohio called the Garden Christian Academy, slated to open August 26th. So I kind of feel like a poser up here with these guys, but so we're the youngest school. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Shailendra Thomas, and I have the awesome opportunity to plant a school in an inner city neighborhood in Dallas, Texas, the King's Academy. And we are planning to open, if God says the same, August 19th, and been in education many, many years, too long to count.
My name's Jeremy Mann. I'm the founder of the Field School, which just finished its second year. We're on the west side of Chicago. We have a kind of 50-50 demographic, low income, high income, and next year we'll serve pre-K up to about 6th grade, although our kind of more traditional classes go up to about 3rd grade.
I'm Roosevelt Wilson from Houston. Our school started last year in September. We're K through 2nd. We're adding pre-K and 3rd grade this year.
Okay, really the first question, thank you so much for introducing yourselves. The first question I have, it relates to something that Russ Gregg said, that he was captured by a vision, and that vision, the conclusion was, therefore I'm going to start a school. And maybe if you just say something about why'd you want to start a school? What is it? What's the vision that captured you? What is it that, I know I feel this way too, what kept you up at night as you were lying in your bed, and what woke you up early in the morning with ideas and fears and hopes that resulted in, and therefore I want to found a school?
So Russ's story is very similar to my husband and I's. So if you heard his story, you've heard ours. Just kidding, I'll tell you a little bit. My husband and I live in intentional Christian community on a former Catholic campus. So the diocese sold these 5 buildings to a prominent, wealthy suburban church on the west side of Cleveland. And long story short, because it is a very long story, my husband and I were asked to lead the intentional home, being both a home for Christians to come live in and do ministry together, and then also to be a house of hospitality for youth groups, prayer retreats. So we've been doing that for almost 8 years, and when we moved in, we had one kid who was 1, and then and I had just finished my master's in urban education and was teaching in the public school nearby. Fast forward, when our oldest son became school age, and I had just finished teaching ESL at the public school, we kind of came to the same question: what are we going to do with our children? I did not want to put them in the public school system. Christian education was important to us. We started looking into different options. Homeschooling classically was one of them that we found, and fell in love with the classical model, and still felt this kind of emptiness as a house of intentional Christian living. What are we going to do to serve our neighbors, to love our neighbors as ourselves? And being in the education field and having kids of education age, we really felt like the Lord was saying, well, if you wanted to give your son this classical Christian education, it's not fair. Like, you have to also think about how you're going to give it to your neighbors. And so someone actually recommended I read a Gospel Coalition article about Hope Academy, and had never heard of a model like that. I think there were tears when we read it. Like, this is it. This is what the Lord wants us to do. So I visited. A friend actually bought me a ticket. We went like the next day. We visited and fell in love with the model, fell in love with the purity of heart and the leadership there, and just the mission focus. And it's been a long venture. God said, "Will you do this?" And we said yes. And had I known everything that came after that, I probably would have said no. But here I am 2.5 years later. So.
Shailendra first said no, but God said yes. I had a wonderful job. Like I said, this is not my first rodeo, so I've been in education a long, long time. And I've done public education, been involved some in the charter school movement. I've been in Christian education for a long time, so I'm thinking I'm about to retire in a few years. You know, I tell everyone I was at a school where I think one of the major problems was at spring break where to go skiing, and I call that a first world problem. And so it was just a wonderful situation, even though I had worked in the inner city in public school for many years. But God kept on. About 2 years ago, some businessmen approached me about starting a Christian school in the inner city. And the head of one of the major Christian schools in Texas approached me. And at first I said, no, I'm just not going to do that. I knew how hard that was. You know, I've left it all on the field for the 2 previous schools I've been at. And I was just like, no, but God kept on doing my prayer time, just work. He would not let me shake it. And you know, I've walked with the Lord a long time. You just know, and there's several things that affirm that. I was born and raised in that community. And you know how you can kind of spend your life getting out of the community? And God's telling you, no, you're going to go back there. And I just knew where I wasn't using the gifts to the fullest potential that God gave me. God has given me a gift to be able to move students and to inspire teachers to move students. And I just knew I had to go back and do it. And once I did what God wanted me to do, it's just been wonderful. It's been the best year of just preparation. Definitely some challenges, but I know I'm in the middle of God's will for my life. So
That's cool. So I began my career as a Teach for America teacher in Los Angeles, and then I worked with Teach for America supervising teachers in Chicago. And Chicago has some really high-performing charter schools, but they're extremely segregated, and the administrators and board members of those charter schools don't send their kids to those schools. So they're good for kind of these kids. And that just didn't sit well with me. And there was also this dynamic where the target was a very, very narrowly defined view of educational excellence in college. And I had done a great books program in college, and it just felt like the goal of 9 months performance on a standardized test, or even 8 years of getting into the right college, that's not a big enough goal for education. C.S. Lewis has this line where he says, if you saw someone in their kind of full God-glorifying glory, you would be tempted to worship them. There's this eternal destiny for every student, and education is this extraordinary opportunity to prepare them for that destiny. And that just got us really excited. Another element of it was my wife was a nurse practitioner at a low-income Christian health clinic on the west side of Chicago. And this clinic was really effective and now has, I think, 8 or 9 sites, 200 doctors, $60 million budget. One of the highest, kind of most impressive clinics in the Midwest, if not the country. And it's deeply Christian. And I like the witness that they have, where they have clinics that don't have any faith background come to them and say, how do you do this? And I think Christians should really be on the kind of vanguard of addressing some of these important issues and doing it in a way where we're all in this together. So it's not a kind of, boy, there's some kids that really need our help. Are we going to help them or not? But we're all in this together, and we're all blessed by the opportunity to kind of tackle this important issue as one community.
So for us, it started probably about 25 years ago. I was an active duty Marine in Okinawa, Japan, and my wife and I, we were homeschooling our kids. I had also planted a church at the time, and I think it was maybe an extension of just learning theology, learning about the Word of God as a new Christian, well, a couple of years old Christian, really appreciating life in Christ and seeing how the way the kids were being taught in our Sunday school class, seeing what that did for them and how we felt that was glorifying the Lord and kids being able to represent Him well. So we just started praying about starting a school. We knew at some point we'd be back stateside, and we wanted to see that happen. Fast forward a few years, 5 years or so, and we're back stateside. 2 years later, I left the Corps after 23 years and started teaching first grade because I needed to start somewhere. And I'll tell you what, that was a trip, right? I don't know for whom the most, the kids or myself. I mean, it was incredible stepping out of the Marine Corps into a first grade class. But I survived. And the kids did as well. But the Lord taught me a lot through that experience. And so I taught there. I did a single gender class one of the years, all boys. And, just was really pressed to the heart with the need, not just to see kids educated, but to see them grow as human beings and being able to appreciate and benefit from the things of God. So about 5 years after that, we decided, let's stop visiting friends in Houston and let's go live there, because that would be a great place to start a school. And there's a lot that I could talk about, and I probably should, because I don't want to answer questions. But I'll fast forward. So my wife and I decided that it's really time to go to Houston. And I want to share a story that really etched in our souls that this was the mission of God. I said to her, now that we've made this decision, and we don't know how we're going to get there, things are going to start happening to keep us here. Well, we've been in a number of churches. Like, we're kind of go where the Lord sends us. We've been a Chinese church, all white church, all black church, and at this time, we're in a PCA church, and we loved it there. And I was a Sunday school teacher, and all was working well. And I didn't want to leave, but I needed to, because obviously the Lord, when He presses your heart, you do what He's asking you to do. And the second thing was the district superintendent. She called me to her office, and she said, Roosevelt, we want you to be a principal in our district, so we're prepared to send you to college to get your master's degree. And, well, ma'am, I'm leaving. Where are you going? I'm going to Texas. Does your wife know? Yes, ma'am, she's going with me. So my family and I, we're going to Texas, and there's all these potential temptations to keep us there. Anyway, we left in 2006, arrived there in Houston, and nothing happened. We wanted to start a school. Nothing happened. I became teacher of the year of my district, and I thought, man, this feels good. An administrator the next year, and a principal soon after. And after about 9 years of that, it was time, because the Lord just gave me a distaste. I didn't like the idea of not being able to nurture kids in the faith. I didn't like the idea of suppressing the knowledge of God. I hated that. But I loved the people. I loved the kids. I loved everything but that. And I ran into a group of folks who had started the plans for Harbor Christian Academy. Beverly Smith, she's the board chair, she had 20 years earlier or so founded Providence Academy, and she felt like the Lord was pressing in her heart, you need to do that in the inner city for kids who can't afford it, who can't afford that kind of education. And she didn't know how until she heard Russ Gregg speak at an SCL conference, And it gave her the impetus to get started. And by the time I'm there, they had laid the blueprint. They even had teachers hired. All was in place. And I remember sitting in the interview session, and they're asking me questions. I'm answering those questions, and I had this stack of card with questions, and I started asking them questions, and it was as if the Lord said, Roosevelt, put your questions away. Like, what answer is going to deter you from taking on this mission? I'm hearing that in my heart. Put the cards away, and we started last September.
I'd like to know maybe what do you wish you'd known? What do you wish somebody would have told you before you got, I know you're going to be launching here real soon, but even when you started the process, is there anything that you say, I wish someone would have told me this would have happened, or I would have needed to known this, or to expect whatever? And the other side of the coin is, what piece of good advice did you actually take and get right from the start? They said, I am so glad that I heard that. Does that make sense to those, kind of think about both sides of those questions? And we could start with you.
I think for me, it was, I think I'm automatically born and raised in this community for 14 years. So, I go over there, I understand, and really don't have a clue when I get over there. It's changed in, 40, 45 years, and how acclimated to the dominant culture I am, and when I get over there. And it's glaring. And so I've spent the last year just building rapport and passport and learning and getting to know the community and the influencers in the community. And, I'm thinking this mindset, oh, you just open a nice little Christian school, kind of like, the dominant culture mindset. People will just come. Well, no, this community can be very untrusting of outsiders. And I'm considered an outsider. And even though once I tell my story, it does build some passport, but still they want to get to know me. And I need to get to know them and their concerns and what they're looking for their families and their children and how we can partner. And so that's been and really, hindsight is always 20/20, really needed to spend another year doing that. Because I was hired and oversight by a dominant culture school. They think just because you're African American, I've been living a very middle class African American lifestyle for 40 years. And so I am having to go and understand what poverty is again and what inner city life is again. And it's coming back to me. I'm a fast learner and but still it's a learning, very much a learning curve. And I really want to be a blessing to these families. I don't want to come in telling them what they want to need and what they, no. I believe, just like everyone has said here, children are created and born with high dignity and worth, and it doesn't matter where you live or how much money you have. It's because you were born in God's image. God has already purposed a plan and given gifts. So I just come alongside and help the families bring that to fruition. And so it's it's already there. The gifts are already there. I'm not coming in doing the, what I'm saying? Of course, I have some tools. I have some professional tools that I use, but it's what God has already, and He didn't give the children in this community less. See, a lot of times I think we feel like, oh, it's less over there. When He created humans, all of us have gifts and ability. We're created, and so He didn't give, these are not children of a lesser God. And so coming with that mindset, to me, is critical, and letting the people know, I value you. And it's not based on all these constructs of society. So.
Thank you. For some reason, in God's providence, our school founding had this like rocket booster blessing. And so we just had things going much better than I was expecting. So we had 45 students in year 1, 82 students in year 2. Next year we'll have 115 to 120. This year we raised 300,000, which to me 2 years ago just felt undoable, unfathomable. This upcoming year we'll have 55% of our staff of color, and 3 times as many applicants as open seats for next year. And I think part of it is the amazing pioneering legacy of some great schools here and other places. Some of them classical Christian schools, but then other just amazing schools that aren't Christian or aren't in the U.S. or aren't. This to me is an exciting kind of renaissance time of education and asking questions and digging in. And it's so helpful to have the playbook of existing schools and not reinventing things and not kind of starting from scratch. And so we've had a few existing schools that we really respected, spent a lot of time at those schools, in some cases hired people from those schools, which really helps. But just the example of schools that have done it 20 years, that know how to do it, that have addressed this in a lot of ways already. And there's new contextual issues, but even in that, one thing that we kind of got the idea of, we didn't know how helpful it would be, is we would have meetings, lots and lots of meetings, and we would ask folks to be on our advisory board. And our advisory board was actually not any work commitment at all. All it meant was that they were willing to be at the bottom of our little piece of paper that said, here's the vision for the field school. And one person I'm thinking of is Heather Dill, who's the president of the Templeton Foundation, which gives away more than $100 million every year. I've never met Heather Dill, but she was a childhood friend of someone on our board, and she heard a little bit about it, and she said, yeah, you can use my name on your advisory board sheet. And so we'd go to someone, they'd say, you got the Templeton Foundation involved in your tiny start school? And it's like, no, we don't really, but there's a little bit of a connection there. And so I think using the credibility of existing leaders, so that Christian Healthcare Center that I mentioned, their CEO is also on our advisory board, and he's lived on the west side of Chicago 30 years and knows all the local politicians and runs an organization that has a $60 million budget. And so just getting some introductions and door open with that was really helpful. In terms of kind of challenges, it's just so hard to start a school. It is, I mean, the amount of things that can go wrong. And I think, you want an organization to have a few priorities each year, and these are things that are kind of existential threats or initiatives that will help you thrive. And it's like, when you're starting, there's about 90 things that if they don't go right, you just won't exist. And that is really daunting, and knowing how to prioritize your time and use your gifting and volunteers and funding and curriculum and students and legal stuff and building stuff, it's just really overwhelming. And so that, I think we kind of knew that was going to be hard, but boy, that really was hard. I'd say another thing that we weren't expecting to be hard was we were blessed by having a lot of people excited about the vision and willing to serve, but that required a degree of fluidity in our staffing and our kind of team dynamic. So in our first year, we had 9 folks that were either full-time or part-time volunteers. So one of our administrators worked full-time, did not get paid $1. 8 other people like that in various capacities at the school. And that was wonderful. But there was a dynamic there that was tricky, and that was most of the people that could work for free are older and white, and so we didn't want our whole staff to be that. And there's a little bit of a negotiation where they're doing this more because they care about the vision and mission, but they're also, like I'm thinking of one person in particular, she said, I'd love to work at the school, but I'll be in France for January, and then I'm going to Australia with my husband in March, and then we have a couple trips to Hawaii every year. And I kind of told her, I was like, my parents are in the same place. So my mom works as a nurse practitioner in a low-income clinic in Nashville. And she works 1 day of a week for fun, basically. Like, she wants to serve in this way. But she travels a lot. And I said, you are such a benefit to the school that we're going to work out that crazy schedule. But that added a lot of headaches, just in terms of who's there and continuity of care and sort of like all being one team. I think it was worth it, but all of the different relationships that revolve around the school and different people being there, that was a lot to manage and a lot to kind of say, what are our non-negotiables, and then where can we kind of flex, was surprisingly complicated.
We connected real quickly with Spreading Hope, and Dan, he was like, I called him practically every day. I started thinking, maybe this guy, he thinks I'm not the person for the job. And just random stuff. Gosh, I got to call. So it was very beneficial to have someone there that you trust and could help you maneuver through the various challenges. And really, I mean, he said a lot so that nothing was surprising. But even though you know there's going to be a tough road ahead, it's only when you start traveling the road that you realize what it means. And but the other things that were said, the good advice, and you know, Russ said it earlier, and I think it's filtered through the school. I think it's kind of the mindset that personally I believe, you know, I want to grow in, and it's really trusting God and recognizing that the school belongs to God, and He's going to shape it according to His purpose. And you have to not only learn to accept that, but accept that with joy. And that was a challenge because certain things didn't work out the way we thought they should. Lots of challenges for the teachers, but then we all realized to a one that we were better people because of it. And so because of, you know, those trials, we also understand that the primary work of God is in us, and what happens through us is just an extension of what He's done in us. And so we are all committed to consistently growing as Christians and representing Christ and being willing to be vessels at whatever cost, and recognizing that could come with pain. So that was a great thing. And then, obviously, you know, with the kids, just seeing the amazing work of God, amazing work. I introduced Hispanic kid, black kid, first day of school, and they were disgusted with each other, wouldn't shake hands. They kind of looked away from each other. A second grader and a second grader. 2 months later, they're the best of friends. 3 months later, one of the guys is sent to me because he kicked the other. And that month, the virtue of the month was truthfulness. I practice truthfulness when my words and my actions glorify God. So the kids get that definition, and we help them understand that. So I asked the kid, why did you kick him? Now, as an administrator for 9 years, I can count the number of times I got an honest answer. I didn't do it. Well, son, I already know you did. I just want this kid, very truthful, I kicked him because he wouldn't move. And I said, well, you know, I appreciate your honesty. You're practicing truthfulness. Do you recognize that you kicked someone who belongs to God? Yeah, he belongs to God. And you belong to God as well. And of course, by this time, we'd stamped out much of that behavior because it's easy when kids start to be trained in the beautiful things of God. And so I said, yeah, you know, people kick animals to get them to move, like a horse. But a horse doesn't have a heart that you have, and a horse wasn't created in the image of God like you and your friend. And I gave him a consequence, and he still wanted to get it right. So with all of that happening and us seeing that and the joy, just a pure joy of being in school, coming from these kids, and the teachers connecting with them, you know, all of that helped us to weather the trials that the Lord took us through.
I don't know what we're going to get right yet. I'm trusting that we will, though. And so to give credit where credit's due, the Lord knew that we needed a lot of help. And so we quickly got connected with Spreading Hope as well. And Dan was getting calls and emails often and helping. I don't know. I'll have to ask. So, and then also the Lord blessed us with the Drexel Fellowship last year. And so Bill Olson, I jokingly call him the educational leadership professor in my back pocket. Like, what do? I don't know what I'm doing. Help me. And so just having their step-by-step, really, guidance on what comes next, what we do need to do to be prepared for opening this August. I'm trusting the Lord in that He has provided the right networking and people and help in that way. So we'll find out real soon here.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. One more question for me, and then I'll turn out to questions from the rest of the group. Just in our consultation sessions today, Artia, without, I know it was in confidence, so we will not share any information. But one thing that came up over and over again was the importance of board leadership and just how key of a role they play. You know, we're all called founders here, but I mean, it isn't like the school started by one person, right? So maybe you could just say something about the importance of people that are on your leadership team, maybe startup team or board, and what kind of role they played, and how maybe they play an essential role there.
So the woman who paid for my ticket to go to Hope Academy is the chairwoman of our board, and without her encouragement and finances, really, like I could cry. Without her encouragement and finances, we wouldn't be doing this. So her encouragement and the rest of the board, without them, we'd be lame ducks on the side of the road. So that's been wonderful. And then again, just the networking support. I mean, we came to this conference 3 years ago, just kind of, what is this all about? What is going on? And when this part, the urban retreat part, my husband and I walked away saying, this is our people group. Like, I always felt a calling to be a missionary before becoming a teacher. And we saw here missionary educators. And then to make the connections with them and to be able to really understand each other, the calling on each other's lives has been just, again, we wouldn't be doing this. So.
Yes, the King's Academy, we have a wonderful board, and I think we do need a little more diversity on it. I'm probably the diverse person on it. And so, but what unites us is the love for Christ. Everyone is passionate about Christ, and they're passionate about children. And I love that, and they're passionate about serving Christ in the inner city. One of the things that I've been trying to have voice to, and it's wonderful because I serve on a board that they value my voice. And a lot of times I feel like we can get stuck on, and even though this is the reality, they're inner city, lower income, the statistics, half of the men by the time they're 18, they're incarcerated, things like that. I mean, those are facts. But really trying to focus on building a ministry, an educational ministry that, like God's creation, is excellent. And that it just happens to be in this community and not always focusing, oh, these poor inner city kids, you know? And trying to kind of change how we view people and children and not always giving them these tags on them, but providing something of excellence in Christ for them. And we feeling that they can reach that. And so I feel like that's kind of the piece that I'm trying to bring. And I have served, God has been preparing me forever for this assignment. And I have served in inner city public schools. I was head of school at kind of like a working class to middle class school. And then I've served in middle to upper class. And I feel like all that has given me different perspectives on this. And I'm excited about just the possibilities are endless for when Christ steps into a child's or family's life. And I really want to focus on that a lot. Not always focusing on, even though those are some real realities, but when you put Christ in there, it changes the equation. It really does. It changed the equation in my life. And so just really kind of bringing this back and giving that different opinion on it. And trying to discuss sometimes some cultural things that sometimes that could be hindrances, you know, and people mean really well, but some things that might be could get you in trouble and might be a little offensive, and as I'm learning too, so.
It's totally about the board. It's good that you're talking about that. And we've had a great board. And the board, if you think about it, the board is really the heart of the organization because employees are great, parents are great, students are great, but the board, not only do they do a ton of work, they give money. I mean, they are just totally the servants of the institution. So yeah, the board's important. We have great board. 3 that come to mind. One is we have a woman, she's an African-American pediatrician on the west side of Chicago. And I've said this to her. I've said, if the whole school just collapsed tomorrow, it would all be worth it because of the opportunity to be mentored by her for me. It's just an amazing woman. She was raised by her grandmother who ran a brothel on the south side of Chicago. And her grandmother said, you can raise the children or you can be a sex worker. And so she was not allowed to go to school. She ran away for times and then would go to school. She snuck into a selective enrollment high school in Chicago, became a strong believer, went to Loyola, and for 3 years at Loyola, she lived in an abandoned property in Chicago that didn't have water or heat. She felt like the Lord was calling her to be a doctor. And she didn't want to be a doctor because she's gotten married, she's about to have kids. She said, I want to be home all the time I can be for my kids. So she felt like the Lord gave her time. The Lord said, you can be a teacher until your kids are older, and then you've got to become a doctor. So she worked as a teacher until her youngest son was in 8th grade, and then she went back to medical school. She lives in the neighborhood. She would love to move, but she says, I'm called to serve here. And she's just a remarkable woman, and she tells all of her patients who are kids, you should go to the field school. And so she's been a great enrollment advocate for us. Just a remarkable person. Another board member, the head of development at the Oaks Academy in Indianapolis, moved to Chicago. And we had a community meeting, and she came up to me after the meeting, and she said, I could donate 30 hours a week to help this school get off the ground. And at the Oaks, she had helped raise $40 million. And we kept track of it. Together, we went on 135 meetings together. And that is so helpful because when I go to some downtown Chicago office and I look like I'm like 19, it's very helpful to have someone else who's helped start 2 schools, who's 65, who drives an Audi, her husband drives an Audi, and she knows this can happen. And she's seen it happen, and she knows how those conversations ought to go. And to do so much of that kind of founding DNA relationship building with her was extraordinary. Last board member is we had a parent who I didn't know very well. My wife and I had him over for dinner and his wife, and we were just chatting. He seemed very quiet. I didn't know if he liked the school or not. This was about a month into it. And they said, I know you do some investing in real estate. Do you want to get coffee sometime and talk about that? So I said, sure. We got coffee, talked about that. Meeting went pretty well. I told him that we were thinking about bidding on a public school building on the west side of Chicago that was being auctioned. And our board was deliberating this because we had just opened the school about 2 months ago. So it felt like a little pickup basketball team saying, let's buy the United Center so that we have a place to practice. Just outrageous, kind of even to consider it. And he was funny. He pulls out his laptop, does a little typing. I'm like, what's that? Why is his laptop out? He looks up at me. He's like, we could give $150,000 for you to bid on the building. This was not a donor meeting. This was just coffee with a guy who's my age. I don't know where that many was. I didn't know he had opportunity to give that much. He's now on the board, and he owns a company, but he volunteers as the school's CFO. So those are 3 stories. And those are people that are just as much in the trenches, have perspective and wisdom and heart in it. And we thank God for them. And they're so important to sustain strong relationships and a sense of kind of unified team that we're all in this together.
Yeah, our board chair, Beverly Smith, she moved into the community, and 2 teachers have moved into the community. My wife and I, we've moved into the community, and she kind of led that, felt like we need to be a part of the community that we're serving. And of course, it's volunteer, but we all wanted to do that. And the thing that keeps us united in our effort is it's really the gospel and the ramifications of the gospel. I mean, we hold each other accountable first for living a Christian life, practicing the things that glorify God, and that comes out in board meetings. It's just wonderful to see the love that they have for the community, and just the great appreciation for being able to do that work in honor of God for the kids.
I misspoke when I said I'm the only diverse one. I was talking about female. I'm the only female on the board, but there are 2 other males of color.
All right, thank you. We have about, 10 minutes or so, Dan? Any questions?
Just as a follow-up to, you dropped that, so, oh, by the way, I went on 132 meetings. Would just be curious to just get a little more detail on, like, who you met with and how many of those turned into interesting things for the school, and how many were just like, oh, you look like you're 18. I don't care if your friend drives an Audi. Goodbye.
I was telling this in our consultancy group. We're not raising people, or we're not raising money. We're not raising curriculum research. We're raising people. It's people. Whether it's staff or a volunteer or connection or even critics, you're raising critics, and you want the best critics you can find that will help you improve. And so I don't know how, I think it was my dad who maybe, when I was in seminary, my dad said, in seminary, you're required to preach 2 sermons, and there will be about 5 students in the class listening to those 2 sermons. So he said, you should set a goal to preach 100 sermons if you can. So we started a little like nursing home church where I preached 60 sermons. And it was great. And it was just, my dad has this way of doing things like this. You should visit 100 countries before stuff like that. So we just said we're going to do 100 meetings. And there's so many great people to meet with. Faith leaders, politicians, educators, potential parents, folks who know the neighborhood well, folks who lead other nonprofits, folks who are business-minded, potential staff members, people that have led other schools. I mean, you could meet with folks all day, and they're very worthwhile. So I don't look at a lot of those meetings and think, oh, nothing really came of that. They're always worthwhile because there's new connections or recommendations or books or really helpful thing. I would say maybe just a practical tip is getting those opportunities to meet can sometimes be hard, or knowing where to go. But we would do public events, and then we would just individually follow up with the folks that came to any of those events, and then any meeting say, who else should I meet with? Who else could we learn from?
One of the long-term questions that I keep sitting with around education, faith-based education, is we're forming people, and we talk a lot about forming people in their love for God, their love for Christ, and that's primarily the work of the church, in the way that God institutes it. So what are your relationships to churches as you're starting out? What are your goals for that? What are the churches that have been helpful? And what are some of the challenges you are anticipating?
It's been a little tough for us to break into the churches within the community. We're still working at it. My wife and I, we left a church because we wanted to be we wanted to worship with the community, and we're still trying to find a church in that community. A part of the dysfunction, maybe for lack of a better word, that we find happening in some of the families that we're ministering to, we also find that streamed throughout the community and some of the organizations, and the churches are not exempt. But we're still working at it, still trying to just make inroads, helping them to kind of see what we're doing and how we can partner to support one another.
Yes, our parent organization, or the church or the school that we're affiliate of, is a mega church. And they have been just so wonderful and so supportive, and really have been ministering in the community for many, many years in several capacities. So kingdom education at its core is a marriage between the church, the home, and the school. And so we really try, even though parents, they don't have to be believers to come to our school, they have to sign off on our philosophy that they will support it and our doctrinal statement. And so what we try to do, one of our board members, he has one of the major churches in the community. And so if they're unchurched or looking for a church, I think we try to feed them into his church. It's a major Bible teaching church. And also, like our parent church, they've just been so very, very supportive. They just couldn't have been more supportive. So
I think for us, and you can tag on this, Steve, if you would speak better on this topic, I think. But we see the church like big C. It's a kingdom mindset, and so we're inviting people, the individuals who do ministry on the same campus as us, who are we can't provide all services to our future students, so we want to invite people in to help us surround those families and those students with the things that they need to be academically successful, to grow spiritually. And so, yeah, I think having a school is an opportunity like no other to really unify the church in that way. Here's your gift set. Here's what you're doing well. Let's do this. Like the kids in our neighborhood need the church.
We did get donations from 2 churches that are outside of the community, who see it as missional work, and First Baptist in Houston, and then the Christ the King Church kind of partnered with us. Just they understand the missional aspect of our work, and they wanted to sow into that.
one of the first things that we did, there were ministries already in the community they have been there for years, for clothing ministries, homeless ministries, feeding the homeless, Bible studies, after school programs. So we just picked up the phone and met with their directors. And, because they already had a foot in the community and they were already serving, hundreds of people in the community. And we shared our vision, and we had vision meetings where we invited those directors. And then we asked them for an opportunity for them to introduce us to their constituency. And so that was the first step. And then each one of those meetings, we asked them to introduce us to some other key leaders in the community. And so that kind of just spiraled as we kept on going. But that was a major way. Now, we've also, there's a new restaurant in the area. We'll just go and hang out there, have breakfast, have lunch. Every time we go, we meet people, we visit, we listen to them. We go to functions in the community, like they had a big Juneteenth festival. We were right there walking around, meeting everyone, showing up at the YMCA. So, we feel like a little politicians, just kind of showing up every place. But it's really been good. It's been a stretch for me, because I think my gift is definitely more pragmatic as an educational administrator, more of a practitioner in the school. And, I know curriculum back and forth and schedules and how to move children and testing and those things, remediation. And so it's been a little stretch for me, but it has been God. I feel like God always takes you out of your comfort zone. And so it's really been such a blessing. And just to meet the families and to talk to them and hear their stories and some of their dreams and struggles. And it's just been a win-win all the way around.
This doesn't totally answer the question, but I felt this is a good story to kind of close with. I want to share. So when I was a kid, my parents were missionaries in China. And I was 18 months old, and I had 2 older brothers, and we're in the airport, and my mom's parents are seeing us off. And my mom's mom had been a little bit ambivalent about this, but not too negative. And we're about to get on the plane. This was back when you could kind of go to the gate. And my grandma says to my mom, "You're going to ruin your kids doing this." That was the last thing before they go to China. Final words. Yeah. And my mom was just in tears getting on the plane, already pretty terrified. And fast forward 15 years, and my oldest brother is graduating from college. And he went to Harvard. He had been an East Asian Studies major. He had an MD, PhD offer from Vanderbilt, and he was a strong Christian. And my grandma's at his graduation. And she says, "I'm sorry for what I said." And my mom, totally gracious, she said, "God brought the right people to care for our sons." And she mentioned a woman named Miss Busby. And she sounds sort of like Miss Frizzle, and she was totally like Miss Frizzle. So imagine Miss Frizzle. Miss Busby was a single gal. I think she was 26, and she went to China with my parents' team. And there were 3 families that had kids. And Miss Busby was the one-room schoolhouse Christian educator in Changchun, China, for these 3 families. And in her first year, she had 7 students. And in her second year, one of the families left, she had 6 students. Third year, our family moved back because my mom had some health problems, and she had 2 students. And that was the extent of her 3 years in China. And she actually ended up passing away 7 years after that. So she didn't know Jason Mann went to Harvard, everything worked out okay. But I think that's a good example of obedience and faithfulness. Some of you might be starting school, some of you may be working in a school right now, and it just feels like it's not going anywhere. And your enrollment is plateaued or it's going up, but there's other problems, or the school's going to shut down. But God is working. God is sowing seed all of the time. And there's this kind of trust that we can have that on the last day, we'll see all that kind of good fruit. And so we are just called to be obedient in the places God's called us to serve.